Hi, soul friends. It's Tannaz Hosseinpour, and welcome back to another episode of the Minutes on Growth podcast. Today, we have the divinely calm, grounding energy of Kim Colella with us. She's an author and a spirit doula. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tannaz. It's just a delight to be here with you.
It's a delight to have your energy with us. It's so grounding. For those who are watching this video, like you understand what I'm saying. And for those who are listening, stay tuned. You'll get it in a couple of minutes. I've been talking to her and I just love how just it's just so calm. You have such a calming energy to you. Has anyone, like I'm sure you've heard that a lot.
Well, I did massage therapy for 35 years as my profession. So, uh, really bringing peace to people has been the focus of my life since I was 26.
Wow.
I had my first massage at a time of great crisis,
Mhm.
and I walked in to the clinic, unable to hold a thought for more than a second before the next one came crashing in. I was angry and hurt and confused and sad. And I left an hour and a half later, still angry, confused, hurt, and sad, but with a deep peace underneath all
Mhm.
that. And I wasn't getting bombarded with those thoughts, right? And I walked out saying, I want to know how to do that for people. And so a month later, I started classes, and within a year, I was licensed. And so just up until 2 years ago, I was seeing clients on a regular basis for both spiritual coaching and
Mhm.
massage.
Wow. So, what
Yeah.
is a spirit doula for those who are unfamiliar with the terminology?
Well, I started using that term before I heard it from anybody else
Hmm.
because when people would ask me, what do you do? Because my primary source of income was my massage therapy practice, I would say I'm a massage therapist. But it started to feel like I was taking a picture of my big toe and saying, this is who I am. It just
Hmm.
didn't encompass. And I had been a birth doula and helped many women give birth and mothered them. A doula is someone who mothers the mother
Hmm.
through the birthing process. And then I started being asked to be with people as they were dying. So I was doing death doula work. And I realized that a spirit doula for me is somebody who helps another birth their spirit more fully into the world. Often we have our spirit kind of hanging up here, and we're a very head centric culture, right? So people, their thoughts are primary. So I like to teach people to go deeper, below those clamoring voices of our intellect and our inner critic and all of that, to move down deeper and to have our soul and our intellect working in communion, a marriage of those two rather than one over the other.
Mhm. I love that. I love that you said a marriage of those two, because oftentimes we hear so much like content out there on like prioritizing one over the other. And it's just like sometimes we're at extremes. And how can we play in the middle area, I think is so important as well, which you touched upon.
Right. Right. And like any marriage, some days we do it really well, and some days, right? There's a little tension between the two, but that's okay. That's where our edges for growth are, is where that tension is.
Yeah. So for those who weren't with us before I press record, which is no one, we were talking about death. And I was sharing with you how I love existential philosophy and theories and just how reflecting on death can give us purpose, meaning, freedom. And you were sharing your journey with me as, a death doula. Can we talk a little bit about that on what reflecting on death means and how it impacts our soul? Because it does sound a little bit morbid looking from the outside to some, maybe.
Right. I think many people have, like, I don't want to talk about death because if I talk about it, then I'm welcoming it and I'm
Hmm.
not ready to go yet. My husband's a hospice chaplain, and the average length of time someone is on hospice is less than a week,
Wow.
even though they may have a terminal illness. And to be on hospice, all you need is a 6 month prognosis, that you won't live more than 6 months, and not be doing anything to prolong or to heal, right? So comfort care is fine, but you can't be having surgeries and things like that at that point. So, you know, as I watched that, as I heard that the average person, and there's all these great benefits to being on hospice, I really reflected on, why do people wait so long? And it's because they don't want to give up.
Yeah.
And somehow accepting that they're at the end of their life is a giving up. Well, I look at myself as in my last third of my life. Um, that gives me a really great container. Like, if I only have a third left, the last third went by in a blink. I've got to get really clear on what it is I want to learn while I'm still on the planet, what it is I want to give, who it is I want to grow into, and what I want to leave behind for not only my beloveds, but for anybody who's interested, right? My book, Spirit Embraced, came out of my question that I often ask myself: if you died tonight, what would you regret you hadn't done? And it was, I would regret I hadn't written down the stories
Mhm.
and the teachings that I've collected, the tools of transformation I've collected for the last 40 years of my life. I want to share those with other people. I've had this great opportunity to work with some great masters, and I want to share what they taught me and how I've utilized their tools to change my life. And even if it's only my son and my daughter of the heart who it touches, that's fine. Um, and if it touches thousands, well, over thousands of people have already downloaded it or bought it. But, I don't know. Whatever happens to it is gift at this point. It's just gift.
Mhm.
So, looking at, how do we live with death as our companion, not our foe, right? But
Yeah.
my father died when I very unexpectedly, the day after my 15th birthday. I didn't have even a chance to say goodbye to him. He had a massive heart attack. He was gone. And a year and a half later, my mother had a massive stroke when I was a junior in high school. So I have walked with death
Mhm.
and the reality of things being able to change in a heartbeat. Everything can change. So, with that, then how do we, knowing that, how do we have death as our companion so we can stay on the course to fulfill our dreams and our passions and our hopes for this life, right?
Yeah.
So, and I took my mother funeral shopping when she was 80. She wasn't expected to live 5 years, and she lived 30. So when she was 80 for her 80th birthday, I took her funeral shopping because she really wanted to get things in order. And nobody would take her. And I told her, well, the next time I come home, I'll take you, Mom. And we had just such a wonderful day. And we giggled and we laughed and we chose her coffin and we chose the lining of the coffin, and paid for everything up front. And afterwards was her party, and people were looking at me as if I had three heads because I'd taken my mother funeral shopping. And my one cousin said to me, well, if I die, I want. And I just stopped her. I said, what do you mean if you die? It is the only thing we are guaranteed when we're born. So why would we
Yeah.
not, but that mindset that somehow all of us think, if we don't think about it, it won't come. And my mindset is, if we think about it, it'll make today sweeter,
Mhm.
right? I can't say goodbye to my husband and son without looking them in the eye, hugging them, and telling them I love you, or have a wonderful day, or somehow connecting, right? Because I know I'm not guaranteed they're coming home. So it's not done with fear, but just a celebration of, I've gotten to love them today.
Right. Right. So that's the emotional, loving, relational element of it. And then we have the purpose and meaning element of it, of which I believe, like Viktor Frankl, like really beautifully put in his book, A Man's
Oh my
Search for
goodness.
Meaning, of like, in, reflecting on death, allows us to kind of wake up and say, like, what
Yes.
do I want to do with my life? How do I want, what do I want my imprint to be on this life, my legacy to be, how do I want people to think about me or feel about me once I'm gone. So I really, I mean, for me, I love it. The Stoics did it, waking up in the morning and being like, okay, if this was the last day of my life, how would I live it? I guess it's just changing people's perception from
Yeah.
fear to purpose.
To purpose. And sometimes for me, the legacy piece I'm called to do, like writing a book was a big deal because I didn't consider myself a writer. So I had to overcome all of
Mhm.
those blocks internally to say yes, right? But then the next one was, so when that was done, then I started asking myself that question in depth. And I heard, have the party you've always dreamed of having
Mhm.
for all the people who put on your wedding. So when my husband and I got married now almost 29 years ago, over 90 friends and family members put on our wedding for 400 people. They did all the cooking, all the cleaning. They made my dress. They made my husband's vest. They sang. They played dance music. They just did everything. They decorated the hall where we were having it. And so, ever since when my husband and I were on our honeymoon, I said, we need to have a party that's all catered and where they are just celebrated for giving us the wedding of our dreams. And so last July, that's what we did,
Wow.
right? And it was supposed to be for our 25th, but that was in the height of COVID, right? So we couldn't do it. So we waited until things felt like, okay, we can do this now. And we did it last July. And about a month later, I started asking the question again. So now what? And what I heard back in meditation was not yet. You still need to savor the party you just had because it was
Mhm.
beyond my dreams. It was beyond my hopes and dreams. It was just a magnificent evening. So, really listening to, okay, so what is that thing? And now it's another book. So on parenting.
I love
Yeah,
I love that. I love that you touched upon the power of community, the power of like relationships, and how having like a warm, supportive community can really change your life. And
absolutely.
yeah, mm,
Absolutely.
power of relationships.
The power of relationships and the power of gratitude.
Hmm.
You know, most of us have heard the quote that if you uh, want to be happy, practice gratitude.
Hmm.
But I recently, a couple years ago, learned the next step. If you want to be joy filled, practice praise.
Hmm.
So the difference between going out and saying, wow, it's a nice day. Thank you for this nice day, to going out and being like, oh my gosh, look at this incredible day. Thank you. Right. It's the energy we bring to
Hmm.
the gratitude. So that party was an opportunity to praise these people who have uh, who have been such a container of support and love for us for all these years.
I love that. And what a blessing it is that you were able to experience that. And they were able to experience that, because it's always a win-win situation of being just feeling loved and seen and valued and appreciated. But I have a question, because if you guys were friends with these people for 29 years, and so the first question that pops up in my head is, were you friends with all of them? Did you maintain that relationship with all of them? Or were there moments where, like, some of those relationships were broken down? Because it is a little bit difficult to maintain relationships for that long, or is it? Or how do we keep relationships for that long? So many questions.
Right. So some of our relationships are relationships of growth.
Hmm.
And then once we've both grown in the way we need to, there's not a lot of heft to continue it. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
you've had that experience where there just wasn't the energy there. Some are relationships of friendship, and then some are relationships of the soul or couplehood, and that's the people we generally learn, we partner with. Because if we partner with someone we have a bond of friendship with, it's not going to sustain a marriage. And if we partner with someone we have a bond of growth with, when the growth is done, then the marriage is done, right? So with these relationships, some of the people I hadn't seen in 20 years,
Wow.
right? They'd moved to other parts of the country. Matter of fact, what the woman who made all of the friend who made all the hors d'oeuvres for 400 people for my wedding, and not only that, but at the reception was the touch point person. So if someone had a question, instead of coming to me, they'd go to her so that I'd be free to just enjoy. She was scheduled to come to the party. I haven't seen her in 13 years. And she was flying in from Maine, and I live in Washington State, so on the opposite ends, right? And she was supposed to fly in Thursday night for the party Saturday night and leave on Sunday. And they canceled her flight because of weather and told her they could get her on a flight on Saturday night. So she had to let go of coming, which was really a disappointment for her and me. We were very excited. But now we are going to Maine this summer for an event, and we're going to stay with her for 2 nights. So it'll give us that chance. And the people who weren't able to come because they lived in other parts of the country, somehow we're having the opportunity to reconnect with them. So not all of the relationships are relationships where we're in contact weekly or monthly, but there's a deep bond between us, even if we haven't seen each other, even if we're not actively nourishing the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think whenever we express gratitude in that way, even if it's somebody we haven't seen in 10 years, it perks up the relationship, right?
Mm-hmm. Such a comforting thought to know that you can not see someone for almost, let's say, 2 decades, but that soul connection can still be there. And that sense of
Yeah,
gratitude and praise and just appreciation, it doesn't go away because you just haven't seen the person physically.
right.
Mm, that's comforting, especially in this world where like we have so many different things coming at us all the time. We have like more responsibilities, maybe at work, at home, and so I hear this often from millennials, people who are my own age, of like, I worry that like if I don't nurture these friendships, like I'm gonna be alone, but I don't have time. I feel so overwhelmed. I have to do this and that and this and that. So hearing that, oof, it's like a load off our shoulders.
Well, yes. And the important thing is to remember that our first responsibility is to nourish our soul.
Mm-hmm.
So if we try to tend all these relationships,
Mm-hmm.
there won't be time and space for ourselves to nourish, to listen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's so primary. And for my husband, that when we got married, you know, the vows are until death do us part or whatever. And we were very clear with each other that if our soul started to die or uh, couldn't be nurtured in the container of our marriage, that would be the death that would end our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And making that commitment to each other has, I think, amplified our commitment to supporting the other's passions and loves,
Mm-hmm.
because we said yes to those. And we know that if the marriage can't hold it, then the marriage will die.
Powerful. As we're speaking about marriage and relationships, I want to ask, how do you think from a spiritual perspective, on a soul level, we can deeper the emotional intimacy between us?
Oh, well, tending the relationship regularly,
Mhm,
which again means that other relationships can't, we don't have time for
mhm,
30, 40, 50 ongoing relationships that we're nourishing on a regular basis,
mhm.
right? Because, well, I can't. And I assume most people can't because there's
Right,
only so many hours in the day.
right.
Um, so that's the first thing, making time, making space, listening to each other without judgment, but with curiosity,
Mhm,
I think is the most important. That I'm not looking for what my husband's saying and what does that mean about me or our relationship or how's that going to affect me, but why is it important to him?
mhm.
Why does he want to do this? You know, I was talking to you earlier about an exercise I do about cutting cords
Yeah.
of so that I stay current in the relationship and that I'm not back 10 years or 10 months or even 10 hours ago because we're all growing and changing. That's what we're called to do in this world is continually expand. So we're not going to stay the same. So I regularly will sit in meditation and I will see my husband or my son or a beloved in front of me and I'll look at the cords between us. I see them come kind of from the power chakra here,
Mhm,
um, between us. And then I can see that some of those cords are kind of lifeless looking, gray, and not a lot of life in them. So I asked the Archangel Gabriel, or the Archangel Michael, depending on the day, to come and to bring their golden sword and to use their precision to cut the cords that no longer serve me, the other person, or the world.
mhm,
And then I watch the golden sword come down, and those old lifeless cords drop. And what's left are the healthy, strong, life giving cords between us. And then I do a process of apologizing for any way I may have hurt or offended them and ask for their forgiveness and wait till I hear that in my heart. And then I hear them ask the same. And when I'm ready, I offer that and we hug and they go off. And sometimes I'm in the bathtub doing this and I might have 20 different relationships or issues. And sometimes even with my own self,
mhm,
I'll see the adult Kim and maybe the 10-year-old and what needs to be cleaned up between us or or the crone I'm growing into, what needs to be cleaned up. I also do the Honopono prayer often.
yes.
And my husband often goes to bed earlier than me. He falls asleep earlier. So when I go up, I'll just put my hand on his head and I'll say, I love you. And then I'll just let myself feel that love, but to see the images of what I love so deeply about him. And then the next is, I'm sorry. And that, again, that sorry could be for something that I don't feel I'm living up to in our relationship that day or whatever. Or it could be a difficulty he's going through at work or in another part of his life. So offering compassion and then please forgive me. And then the last one is thank you. Thank you. And sometimes that takes a minute, and sometimes it takes a half hour that I'll just be sitting there basking in that to nourish, knowing that whether he's asleep and not even aware I'm doing it, that it is building in me my capacity to love and receive him more and more each day. You know, we've been together now 31 years, and I still feel like a novice. Like I have so much learning about love, loving and being loved, receiving love. For many of us is the real difficult,
Right.
right? Especially as women. I think, well,
Hmm.
probably for men as well, right? Where it's easier for us to give
To
than
give.
to receive.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That cord cutting exercise, I mean, I have heard it before when you want to let someone go, but the way you phrased it is letting go of, the past version of them so I can create space for the most current version of them is so deeply profound. And I wonder, based on your experience doing this, because I've never done this and I can't wait to do it. But when you shift that dynamic on an
Mhm.
energetic level, do you notice a change in the physical realm when you're physically interacting with them?
I would say mostly with my son, who's going to be 26 in a couple months. You know, and young people change so much so fast.
Hmm.
And I'll start to feel some resentment about something. And then I'll sit back and say, where's that coming from? And then I realize, oh, because I'm back a year or two, right? I need to back off. He doesn't need mom involved as much
Hmm.
now as he did when he was 10, you know? So then as I feel myself do that and cut those cords and receive him as an adult, then I feel his resistance go down
Hmm.
because he feels respected,
Yeah.
right? He feels respected and seen, um, trusted.
Wow.
Yeah,
Really
it,
important feelings to
yeah,
feel.
yeah, yeah. Before I got married, I had a client who said, I've been married 25 years to three different men. And I looked at her and she said, my husband has had, he's been three totally different people in 25 years because he's growing and expanding. And that gave me such comfort as I was preparing to say, until death do us part, that I promised to love and honor this person all the days of my life. It gave me such comfort of, oh, he's not going to be the same exact person. And he's not. He has changed so many different times in really profound ways. And now, as we're in this last season, we're learning a whole new part of each other. He's going to be retiring in the next year. And I can't wait to see what bubbles up for him
Hmm.
and who he becomes as someone who's retired.
Yeah. I read this beautiful quote online by Sylvie, and she wrote, like, love is pretty much like going, I don't want to butcher her words, but her idea was that in a relationship, we have to be open to grieving the
Mhm.
loss of multiple versions of our partner and like going to multiple funerals of the same person and allowing a new version to be birthed. And I think that's a really, mm, I don't want to say challenging, but I don't think it's an easy task in a
Well,
relationship because we get attached to a specific version of that person.
right. And we also get attached to who we are in that relationship.
Right.
And we have to grieve 1,000 deaths
Mhm.
as we change and have challenges that shift who we are,
Yeah.
right? So, and then how that affects the relationship. You know,
Right.
I suffered two concussions in the past within 7 months of each other. Uh, the last one was 2 years ago. And so that has really affected me.
Hmm.
And I need a lot more silence and a lot more quiet.
Hmm.
And being in large groups is very stressful for me.
Mhm.
Going to the theater, I fall asleep. Like overstimulation. It's very intriguing to me. Like I I treated people with concussions for 35 years and I had no idea what they were going through. But what I'm always really aware of as I have times that I'm grieving, but I liked the extroverted me. I liked the person who was the last one to leave a gathering and who had so much energy to do all this stuff. I miss her and I have to grieve her so I can
Mhm.
welcome this monastic crone who's been born out of it, right? But I also grieve for my husband because he has a totally different wife than he did 3 years ago,
Wow.
right? And so just being aware, like, wow, this must be a lot for him to adjust to, and how grateful I am that he keeps adjusting. And sometimes he goes into denial, and he's the first one to own that. Um, that he and my son just can't bear to think I'm not as strong and able to do all the things I could do before, and they fall into denial. And then I have to remind them, I can't do two things at once. You have to keep it to one thing, or I'm going to get cranky. You're not going to get the response you want. You need to give me time, just as we gave our son when he was little. Okay, this is a 5-minute warning. In 5 minutes, I need to ask you this question, or sometime in the next 5 minutes, so that I have time to complete what I'm doing so I can give my attention. So, throughout all of our lives, right, we
Mhm.
all have challenges that change us, life experiences that change us. And, my book I write about, I traveled by myself when I was 30 to Calcutta, India, because I wanted to meet Mother Teresa and see the work she was doing. And 2 days before I left, I started crying and I couldn't stop. And it wasn't because I didn't want to go, it was my fantasy trip of a lifetime. I'd wanted to do this since I was a little girl. I'd wanted to meet her and see her work in Calcutta. But it was because I knew I was going to come back different. And
Mhm.
I had no idea who I would be when I came back. Right. So, this journey of relationship with ourself and our own soul and with another is really the hero's journey. It's not some mamby-pamby thing we're doing. It's a big deal to stay curious and open and willing for life to change and for life to change us. And I think a lot of the contraction that we see in the world at times is because people want to hold on to old paradigms and they don't want to breathe into the new and see what it has to offer us.
Right. I mean, change is the only constant in life, but it doesn't make it less daunting at times.
Right. Unless we expect it,
Mhm.
then it takes an edge off of it.
Mhm.
And one more thing I want to say about relationships, which was really important to me and I want to share with you, is that I had a wonderful teacher named David Spangler. He taught the first two courses of my master's program, but then I went on to continue studying with him. And after Nico and I had been married, I don't know, a year or two, those first years were really hard because I
Mhm.
was 35 and he was 38. It was a first marriage for both of us. We had a lot to let go of being single to enter this. Um, and he is such a safe space. That old wounding rose in me that I never expected to. I thought I had healed it all. But
Mhm.
because he was so safe, all the times I felt, all the ways I felt unsafe growing up came to the surface.
Mhm.
So I often thought I've made a mistake. I should have never married this, but this is so hard, you know? So I was in class with David and somebody asked him about soulmates. And he said, well, if there is such thing as a soulmate, your soulmate is for your soul's growth. And therefore, they're going to take you to your edges. It's not going to be a tra la la. We're constantly gazing into each other's eyes and seeing the whole world and all beauty in that person. There's going to be time where it is so difficult because they're taking us to the next stage of growth for ourselves. And when he said that, this weight just lifted off me. And it was like, oh, I'm with the perfect person. He's taking me to my edges, but he's also creating a safe container for me to go there and to see the rage that's been pushed down and the fear and the grief that hasn't been expressed. He's allowing the space for that. That's why it's so hard.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to offer that to you and to your listeners because I think so much of our culture and media give us this Hollywood version of
Yeah,
then they live happily ever after. And at least, I grew up and a lot of the cartoons, Snow White or whatever, and then they lived happily ever after. And so entering marriage, I'm like, where's the happily ever after? Because this is really hard, right?
right. Right. I definitely agree with you. And I always tell my clients, like, you don't manifest a magical relationship, you co-create one with effort, with time, with tools, with insights, with understanding, with knowledge, with trial and error, with so many different components that go into it. But I think where people kind of get confused and maybe stay in unhealthy dynamics that don't serve them is, they hear this, yes, marriage is challenging. Any relationship has its own challenges. But you specified something, and I love that. And you said he created a safe space for me to kind of navigate through that. And I think it's super important to distinguish, the two types of challenges. One relationship is, challenging, but it's a safe space to navigate those challenges together. And then one is challenging because there's fear present, there's abuse present, there's uncertainty, there's doubt, and that is
Yes.
not a safe space. And
Right.
so,
One is soul sucking, and
mhm,
your soul dies a little bit each day by being there.
mhm,
The other is for soul's growth, and you can feel this is really scary, what I'm having to look at, because I'm realizing it's still there and unhealed in me.
mhm,
Right. That's a much different dynamic. And so glad that you stopped and clarified that it's not, we've all watched people's soul get dimmer and dimmer, their light get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. And I say that love is expansive and expanding,
mhm,
right? We grow more into who we are. We don't contract and get smaller. So that for me is an example too of how do I know if it's the right place. And I would get so infuriated those first years. And sometimes it'd be from something simple like Nico saying, would you mind washing the dishes tonight? Because he'd washed them the last three. And this rage, I didn't know where it came from, right? He wasn't, I'd always say he's not, an addict. He's not beating me. He's not suppressing me. Why am I so mad? Right. But I'd have to leave the house and go for a walk because I felt like if I didn't, it wasn't going to be pretty. So I'd just say, I need time. I'd go for a walk and I'd always, ask, have I made a huge mistake? Am I supposed to leave? And underneath all of these voices of anger and fear and rage, when I drop down into the center of my being, into that still small voice, not a voice of should, not a voice of fear, but that voice of love that lives in each of us. Every time that voice said, you are exactly where you need to be for your growth. Every time, every time. This is exactly the right person for you to journey with.
wow, I love that. I love that. I told you this is not going to be a 20-minute conversation. But I mean, thank you so much for sharing very vulnerably. And it's just so refreshing, for you to share your self-reflections and how you've grown, and so that we can learn and, um, gain gain insights from your experiences. Last question, I promise. Looking back on your 29 years of marriage, what is one thing you wish you could have told that younger version of yourself, except the one that we just discussed right now?
Because that's the first one, of course, because we just discussed it of just enjoy him. He is what you have asked for. Enjoy him. Enjoy the ride. And don't be afraid when things feel scary. You know, before I met him, I I'd had other men ask me to marry them. And I always had a question that I would ask myself before I would answer. And that was, would I trust this man with the soul of a child, our child, my child? Because I knew I wanted to be a mother and I wanted a father that could love a child into their wholeness or not somehow dim their light in any way. And the other men, I didn't have that confidence. But the night I met my husband was at a dance for a community of people with developmental disabilities and those who choose to live with them as family. And I watched, it was a fundraiser for this community. And I watched him come in through two doorways and thought, that man looks interesting. A bit scruffy, but interesting. And then I watched him come in and dance. I saw this light and delight in him with each person, whether they had Down syndrome, whether they had another disability, or whether they didn't have any obvious disabilities like all of us, right? He treated everybody with the same love and delight and looked at them as if they were the only person in the room with just the smile and energy. And I turned to a friend and said, I want to date with that man by the end of the night. And I had already sat down. I had stopped dating men who I knew I wouldn't trust to be
Mhm.
the father of my child. And I wrote down what I was looking for in a life partner. And after our first date, I went home and said, are you who you seem to be? Because everything I'd asked for was embodied in him.
Wow, you manifested those traits in him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, or I
The person who
manifested
had
the
those
path,
traits.
the pathway to be cleared between us so we could recognize each other. Right. Sometimes I think we keep on the same path, right? And expect that person to show up. But sometimes we have to clear the new pathway. We have to build new neural pathways in our brain to be ready for
Mhm.
when that person shows up, right? So I'd done a lot of work before I met him, and I recognized him because I became crystal clear what I was looking for. And so when I met him, it's like, I think that's it. I think he's the one. It took him a little while longer to know that, but he caught up. He was terrified. So,
But your certainty created space for his certainty.
right,
Mm.
it
Love.
did.
I love the power. I think oftentimes we underestimate the power of our soul and the energy that we can take into places and how we can shift the energy of situations from within.
Yes.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kim, for sharing, for being here with us today, for your calming voice and presence. Tell us, how can people purchase your book? Where can they get it from?
So they can purchase it on Amazon at their local bookstores. They can order it for them through Ingram Spark. They can go to my website, spiritdoula.com, spiritdoula.com. Yeah, they can get it just about anywhere.
Wonderful. And I'll put a link to your website in the show notes so that
Oh,
everyone
thank
can
you. That
access
would
it.
be wonderful.
Yeah, it's much
That would
easier
be
that
wonderful.
way.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you so much for being here with us and for sharing your honest experience of life and of your soul's journey.
Thank you so much. It was a delight.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Speak soon.